Lucian Meyer proudly presents In the Blood. Chapter 0, The Long Way Down.
A small pebble came and hit him square in the forehead. "Son of a bitch! Watch where you put those big-ass clodhoppers," Taylor yelled above him. Scott laughed. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I hit you?" he asked back, trying to sound innocent. Scott started to whistle as he pushed his foot into the wall. He pushed off the foot, catching the next hold with his fingertips. His arms flexed, pulling him to the next safe hold for his foot. "You know damn well you hit me. Stop being so proud of it," Taylor yelled back. They continued to climb and banter towards the top of the cliff. They had been climbing together for years. Someone who didn't know them would think that they were arguing all the time. But in all actuality, they were the best of friends. They had climbed many places in Utah's incredible landscape. They had spent some great summers exploring Utah's backcountry. Scott was the one that brought Taylor into climbing, and they had been friends before either of them could remember. Taylor and Scott had met at the library. Very few times does friendship endure through story time. However, their friendship had endured. It had been the one thing they had both learned to count on, even when everything else had been taken away. That first summer, they had become fast friends. They spent their summers going around Salt Lake City and exploring the mountains behind their homes. It had been rough for Taylor. He had lost his family when he was 13. This was one of their favorite faces to tackle. It had an incredible view, but most unique was the fact that as you climbed up the sheer rock wall, not 20 feet away was a roaring waterfall. Hanging 80 feet in the air next to thousands of gallons of roaring water is quite unique. And after 20 minutes of climbing, Taylor finally swung his leg over the last hold and popped over the edge. When they got to the top, they sat with their feet dangling off the edge. They looked into the valley below. Taylor had short dark hair that, if left to its own devices, would turn into a curly mess over time. His eyes were a strange hazel. He had a light build, a little too skinny. He was about 6 feet tall. Scott, on the other hand, had long blonde hair and deep blue eyes. He was a medium build and slightly shorter than Taylor. They both lit up a cigarette and relaxed, as much as one can sitting on top of a 100-foot cliff. "So, we gonna tackle the upper face today?" Scott asked. "Tiffany's gonna be pissed if we do," Taylor asked in return. Tiffany was Scott's girlfriend and expected them back in a couple of hours. They would have a challenge making that time if they attempted the upper face today, although Tiffany had been around them long enough to know that they would always climb one more face or ride another couple miles. Taylor and Scott shared many traits, and the willingness to always go one more step was one of those. The upper face was not far, but they would have to cross the river and hike about a half a mile. "She won't be that mad," Scott replied. "Your funeral," Taylor said, laughing. Taylor and Scott sat in silence and took in the view. Sometimes Taylor and Scott could go for an hour without a word. They were not talking, but they were still in sync with each other. They had been friends for so long they had a bond deeper than language, and they enjoyed one of those moments now. First Taylor's family, and when they were 18 they had lost Scott's mother, who had taken Taylor in. They only had each other. Scott had Tiffany as well. Taylor, on the other hand, seemed to prefer to be alone. However, as in most cases, that was not the full truth. When Taylor's parents died, he had had a girlfriend. Scott still got angry to the day when her name got brought up in conversation. She had left Taylor because it did not fit into her plan to deal with a grieving boyfriend. Taylor was never mad at her, saying that he understood. However, the cold shoulder that she received from Scott was legendary. Taylor had been pushed, set up, tricked into, and any other method you can imagine to meet this girl or that. He never took more interest than friendship. They finished their smokes and got up. Scott stretched his back. "You okay to go on there, old man?" Taylor asked. "What the hell, man? You're older than me," Scott snapped back, smiling. "Only in body," Taylor replied. "That's the truth," Scott said, rolling his eyes. They walked to a crossing point over the river. A rope was fixed on both sides of the river to allow them to wade across. They clipped into the rope and started to inch across the ice-cold water. The cold water waking up their senses. The cold water almost made Scott reconsider his decision to take on the upper face. When they were halfway across the river, the rope started to make a strange noise. Taylor looked at the two tie-off points, but they were secure. The noise came again. What they could not see was the rope had frayed away, and with the new weight of the two young men on it, it could not hold very long. "I don't like the sound of that. Move!" Taylor yelled over the rumble of the river. Taylor was almost across when he felt the rope go. It snapped at the weak point. It let Taylor and Scott loose. Taylor reached out and grabbed Scott by the forearms. He tumbled into the river, but Taylor had a good grip. The current was strong, but Taylor held with all his might. "Get on your feet!" he screamed at Scott, who flailed wildly in the water. The rope had ripped free, and now they were entirely on their own in the current. Scott gained his footing and started to come out of the water. He took a step forward, and both of them thought it was over, but Taylor took a step and slipped on a rock. Now Taylor dropped into the water. Scott desperately tried to keep upright, but also toppled into the water. Taylor and Scott both saw their short lives flash before their eyes. Although it was only a second, it seemed much longer for both of them. They were pushed and rolled by the current to the edge of the waterfall. They disappeared over the fall and into the spray. The birds went back to singing as if nothing had ever happened. The two young men swallowed by the river, and no trace of them could be seen or heard.